Hello everyone. We're excited to be here with you all today. I'm Morgan.
I'm Nicole.
And I'm Mary Helen.
And we're Coal in America, along with Professor Free over there with the Duke University's Energy Initiative, Malu, and Alex.
The goal of the Coal in America project is to explore the history of the coal industry from the perspectives of those who've lived it. Over the past 6 weeks, we've begun the first phase of that project, traveling to Kentucky to interview coal miners, their families, and members of their communities. We've also created a pilot website for archiving and presenting these interviews. As the project expands in the coming years, this website will also expand to include interviews and other relevant resources relevant to every major coal mining region in the US.
We've been very careful with how we consider Appalachia, the region that we've been visiting. It's an area that's attracted a lot of scrutiny, from being the ground zero to the war on poverty and to today in the wake of the 2016 election. And to avoid forcing a narrative onto a people already stereotyped as hillbillies, we've let our narrators tell their stories as they see fit, with as much control as they have.
So if you take anything away from this presentation, take this. There's no one single story of coal in America. Each person we spoke with shared a very unique set of stories based on their own experiences and their own contexts. And while we certainly noticed common themes throughout narratives, we were really struck by the very broad range of perspectives that these interviews revealed. So we realized that this very short presentation can in no way do justice to the many voices we heard or to the real diversity of people that we've met, but we'd like to very briefly share with you some of the heartbreaking, some of the inspiring, some of the infuriating, some of the funny, and some of the hopeful stories we've had the privilege of hearing. Take a listen.
I guess it's just because, I like to work in the mines. I guess when you get it in your blood, that's what you want to do.
Yeah. That's the terrifying part of it. You don't know where it's at, what it is, or if you're ever going to see the light of day. And that's a bad price to pay just to try to make $1.
Funny nicknames too. And one of them's name, he had a nickname, Lovely Butt. But and as far as the men, you couldn't ask for any better men, to work with. And we had women that worked underground.
I hadn't been there 6 months when one of the guys on my section got killed, and I helped carry him to the track, and he died before they got him outside, they said. Well, I gotta work. I just can't quit my job now.
These stories paint a very complex picture of coal in these regions that, unfortunately, we don't have time to dig into today. What we can do is tell you a little bit of our own story, or at least one day of it.
So Wednesday, June 13th, we left our home base in the former coal company town of Lynch, Kentucky at 9 for Malu and Nicole's 10 a.m. interview with Bethel Brock.
When Bethel first opened the door, the first thing I noticed was his sweatshirt, which read, "Walk the crooked roads to fight black lung disease." We go into his office where we have the interview, where we learn this man entered the mines at 15 years old to support his family, worked in the mines for 27 years, was the union president in Wise, Virginia, before being laid off at 55. By this point, he had already contracted black lung disease.
Sadly, black lung disease is something we learned a lot about over the course of this project. Black lung is a progressive and ultimately fatal disease caused by coal dust settling in a miner's lungs over the course of many years. We spoke with 16 miners over the course of this project, many of whom we got in contact with through the Appalachian Citizens Law Center, a law firm in Whitesburg, Kentucky that specializes in assisting retired miners who have black lung. This meant that a large number of those we spoke with had the disease. Listen to Bethel Brock describe what it's like to live with black lung.
See, your legs is the first thing suffers from black lung. See, I can sit on my riding lawnmower or tractor and do okay, but then when I start walking, especially up a hill, it just takes too much oxygen.
Eventually, the disease progresses to the point where individuals are bedbound.
If mines are properly ventilated, miners are far, far less likely to get black lung disease. Companies are supposedly held liable if their miners get the disease, and victims of black lung are supposedly entitled to benefits. But the legal battle to get these benefits can take years, and many who suffer from black lung never receive them.
Although Bethel had already contracted a disabling illness, he wasn't content to just sit at home. Despite never completing his high school diploma, he went back to school at 55, and at age 60 graduated from the University of Virginia at Wise so that he could become a paralegal and help fight for other coal miners to get their benefits. It took Bethel Brock himself 14 years to get his benefits from his home company of Westmoreland Coal. After, to hear him tell it, Westmoreland took every legal and some illegal measure to deny him that. We talked about this and a lot more in our 90-minute interview, to what it's like to raise 7 kids on miners' pay, to attempted murder plots in the mines themselves. Still, when I asked Bethel what he wanted people to know about him, he said this.
But if I had become any kind of a lawyer, I wouldn't have been more prouder than I am of my history of coal mining.
So after dropping off Malu and Nicole, Mary Helen and I headed over to Jenkins, Kentucky to meet with Mr. Jeff Cornett, or JC.
JC is an avid hunter. As we walked into his living room, we found ourselves face to face with what he calls the beast. This right here is the second largest elk known on record to have been hunted in Kentucky. We sat down in his living room. Morgan took the couch. I took a second recliner, which I pulled closer to his own. That way the microphone I was holding would have him in range. We sat down, explained the project, and got started.
So some important notes about JC. He's in his early 50s. He's the only miner we spoke with who's still working in the mines, and he's one of the few who works or has ever worked above ground on a surface mine rather than below ground in a deep mine. JC is also involved in overseeing the reclamation process for surface mining. So this land right here is an old strip mine that JC helped to reclaim. We talked about a whole bunch of things during our interview, including mine safety and JC's role as superintendent.
You're responsible for, first and foremost, the safety of the men. The worst days I've had were actually involved with fatalities, which both were contractors, but, they still don't make it any easier. It's a pretty big responsibility when you have 300-400 men that depend on you. You've got that responsibility. You've got to keep them safe, and like I say, that's first and foremost. It's safety, then productivity.
So we want to give you just a hint to some of the stories and thoughts that run through our heads during an interview.
When JC discussed making safety the first priority of the mines, I thought of our interview with Mr. Rod Sturgill. Rod Sturgill was a retired miner who survived the 1976 Scotia mine disaster.
And I thought of Mr. Freddie Joe Brock, who remembers putting up ventilation equipment underground only when they knew that inspectors were coming.
Freddie was not in a unionized mine. However, by this point, we had conducted interviews with 14 other coal miners, which meant that we heard a lot of stories of companies trying to exploit miners and how miners used labor unions to fight back.
Which makes me think of Mr. Rex Fields, who was the president of his union at Southeast Coal Company, and of Mr. Larry Eisen, who once went on strike in Harlan County for 13 months in order to get a fair working contract.
It was always fascinating to hear the similarities and differences, the connections and contradictions that painted the perspectives of those we spoke with.
After Morgan and Mary Helen's interview, JC had an idea. He took all of us to see our first active strip mine, our first chance to see the industry in practice. He took us down roads he had himself built 20 years before and pointed out machinery as we passed it. And after that, he took us to his favorite Mexican restaurant in Jenkins.
So after lunch, JC headed off to work, and the 5 of us went to Eola, Kentucky to meet with our artist friend, Jeff Chapman Crane. I'd met Jeff and his good friend Mike Dixon the week before at an art festival put on by Apple Shop in Whitesburg, Kentucky.
Jeff is an artist, and he invited us to dinner, which we had homemade chili and strawberry cobbler, a tour of his gallery where he paints these beautiful portraits of the faces and history of Appalachia. And then we did a roundtable interview. Right behind him, of course, he's being on the left, Mike on the right, you can see his protest piece about strip mining called The Agony of Gaia that took him 17 years to complete.
We sat down with Jeff and Mike in Jeff's gallery, surrounded by the work, and spoke about the lives and perspectives of these 2 men. Both of them lived in the same communities as the miners we had interviewed, and their lives were also affected by the coal industry, just in different ways.
So Mike told us this one story of a coal company threatening to strip his father's land. They were using a legal loophole to begin mining without Mike's or his father's consent.
Yeah, that happened with my family, and there was no legal recourse. So I sat on top of a big rock with a shotgun. I knew the guy who was driving the bulldozer, and next day I was up there when they started the morning shift, and I walked down and said to him, "You see the line over there that I marked?" He said, "Yeah." And I said, "If you cross it, you die."
No one was shot. They took the issue to court. Mike was able to defend the land and keep strip mining off his father's property. But it did show this huge array of perspectives that existed in the communities, especially as JC had shown us an active strip job that morning.
We so wish we could just play full interviews for you all right now so you could hear the stories of Ed Banks, of Clinton Sanders, of Gary Sloan, of all the other people we had the opportunity to speak with these past weeks. But you'll have to do that on your own time on our beautiful website.
You can hear about how JC was almost recruited to go to China to oversee surface mines.
Or the time Mr. Fields went to Washington as union president.
Or Mr. Ison's dream about writing a book about how the best union man he ever met was a woman.
We're excited to continue this project in the fall through Basque Connections, to continue learning, and to continue hearing the many, many stories that make up coal and America. Thank you very much.